Hi, in this lecture we are going to learn what are the cursors and cursor types and the differences between them. I had mentioned about the cursors in our previous lessons to enlighten you about how plsql engine and SQL engine cooperate. Now I will expand that subject in detail and explain you the cursors in all details. First, let's remember how SQL and plsql engines work. The Oracle database has two engines working for SQL and plsql codes, SQL engine and the plsql engine. All the SQL codes are executed in the SQL engine and plsql codes are executed in the plsql engine. But now we know that we use SQL commands in our plsql code too. So the plsql engine must communicate with the SQL engine. When the plsql block faces with any SQL command, it passes that code to the SQL engine. This code is executed in there and the result returns to the plsql engine again. So if you have a select query in your code, it is fetched from the database by the SQL engine and that result is stored in the PGA, which is Program Global Area. Every session will have its own memory when it is created. So the select result is stored in the context area in PGA. This area is a session private memory. Only that session can reach to that area. This operation is done by the Oracle server automatically. We cannot control that flow. So even if your SQL query works alone, even if there is no plsql code, your query result is stored in the context area and you get the result from here. Now let me show you something. Let's open up SQL Developer and select from a table. Select all the columns from employees. When we run that and scroll down the results, when you scroll down whole 50 columns, you should see there is a small freeze on every 50 rows. When you scroll whole 50 columns, it waits for a little time and returns the next 50 rows. We set that from the Tools, Preferences, Database, and Advanced. Now we can see the SQL array fetch size. It is writing 50 in here and we saw that it was freezing in each 50 rows while scrolling. Now what does this mean? When we query from the database, Oracle has a little complicated method to retrieve your data. Actually, this is a database administration subject, but I will mention a little. If your query has a small amount of data, it is stored in the session's PGA. But if the result is too big, it is not stored in the memory. Instead, some of the result set and some algorithms, execution plans, etc. are stored in the context area to retrieve the rest of the result set faster. Now, at that point, we face with the cursors. Cursors are pointers to the data. We can say that the cursors are the pointers that points this data in the memory or in disk. The server handles us the data with using the cursor. This type of cursor is called as implicit cursor. There are two types of cursors, implicit and explicit cursors. The implicit cursors are created by the database server and managed automatically. Cursors are to handle the select queries, fetching data from the memory. In SQL Developer, since we set it as 50, it fetched the first 50 rows from the database or memory, then shows that 50 rows. When you scroll down, it fetches the next 50 rows and shows that too. But be careful, it does not go to the database disk all the times. It gets all or some of the rows, stores them in the memory, and handles them as one by one in each fetch command. Every time you select from the database, an implicit cursor is created for you, and this cursor is killed when your block is finished or when you finish the cursor explicitly. But most of the times we want to control the cursor to use in our program. We want to fetch the rows one by one. For example, if you want to calculate the salaries of each employee, we create a cursor, fetch the values via that cursor one by one, and operate all of the employees one by one. This usage of cursor is called as explicit cursor. explicit cursors are the cursors that you created in your code. This usage is really efficient and fast way because instead of selecting from the database for each employee, we get a bunch of them or all of them. The database decides that, then iterate on them one by one, just like selecting one by one. But since you get many results at one time into the memory, it will be much faster than selecting one by one from the database. Now, you can say that why don't we use collections instead of cursors? Of course, collections have some advantages on the cursors, but cursors have too. Let's think a scenario. Let's say that we want to query all the columns from a table that has millions of rows. If you want to get them all into a collection, you may have some memory problems. Maybe your program can crash because of the lack of memory. If your program is used by many users, all of them will have that problem. Maybe the database will fail because of that. So this is a problem. But the thing you want to do is operating on the values one by one, and it must be fast. At that time, we use explicit cursors. Because explicit cursors do not get all the result set into the memory directly. The server arranges that based on the result set and the memory situation. Besides, using cursors are pretty simple and fast than using collections. And there are some other features that you cannot do with collections. But of course, collections have some advantages too. For example, you cannot go back in cursors. You can go only further. Since all the data will be on the memory, it will be much faster to reach that data after adding these values inside of our collection. By the way, in our previous lessons, we added our values from the tables by selecting for each time. We run a select query for each employee. But there are some other methods like bulk collect to increase the performance of adding values by selecting from the database. But this is a tuning subject, and I will mention that in detail in the tuning section of this course. To sum up, we can say that cursors are the pointers that you can iterate on the data that you selected. Cursors have a fetching and memory algorithms, so it gets a bunch of results set into the memory at a time, so your operations will be much faster than selecting for each time. There are two types of cursors. Implicit cursors are created automatically in each select by the database server. Explicit cursors are created by the programmer to iterate on the result set of your query. Since we cannot control the implicit cursors, we cannot do anything on that. So we will learn how to use explicit cursors and the benefits of that in our next lectures. So this is the end of this lecture. See you in the next lessons.